When a father and daughter vanish from their mountain camp, you expect ground clues. You don't expect their tent floating in clouds, 14,000 feet high, 5 years after they disappeared. Yet weather records revealed something darker. The night they vanished, a violent storm hit that mountain, strong enough to destroy any tent. So how was theirs still intact? This is the story of Michael Torres and his 14-year-old daughter Sofia, whose weekend camping trip to Mount Rainier became one of the most impossible mysteries in mountaineering history. But more than that, it's the story of a discovery that defied every law of physics and left even experienced climbers questioning what they thought they knew about the mountain. Michael Torres was the kind of father who believed adventures were better shared. A carpenter from Tacoma, he'd been taking Sofia camping since she was old enough to carry her own water bottle. Mount Rainier held special meaning for them. It was where Michael had proposed to Sofia's mother 8 years earlier, and where they'd scattered her ashes after losing her to cancer 2 years ago. These camping trips had become their way of staying connected, of healing together in the place that held their most precious memories. Sofia, now 14 and inheriting her father's love for the outdoors, had been looking forward to this October trip for weeks. School had been stressful, and she needed this escape into the wilderness where her phone had no signal, and her biggest worry was whether they'd packed enough hot chocolate mix. She'd even convinced her father to let her bring her mother's old hiking boots, a pair she'd finally grown into. They arrived at the Cougar Rock Campground on Friday afternoon, October 12th. Other campers remember seeing them at Site 23, Michael patiently teaching Sofia how to set up their bright orange tent while she insisted she already knew how. "Dad, I've got this," she'd said, but she was smiling as she said it. They seemed comfortable together, easy in each other's company in the way that spoke of countless shared adventures. That evening, the temperature began dropping faster than expected. October in the Cascades can be unpredictable, but Michael and Sofia were prepared. They had proper four-season gear, sleeping bags rated for sub-zero temperatures, and years of mountain experience. Fellow campers heard them talking by their fire, Sofia reading aloud from a book about local hiking trails, while Michael prepared their dinner on a small camp stove. Around 9 p.m., the wind began picking up. Nothing alarming at first, just the kind of mountain breeze that makes trees whisper and campfires dance. Michael was banking their fire for the night when another camper, Janet Morrison, walked by with her dog. She remembers waving to them, seeing Sofia already in the tent with her headlamp on, probably writing in the journal she carried everywhere. Michael called out a friendly, "Good night," before ducking into the tent himself. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. What happened next defied explanation. Sometime between 10 p.m. Friday and dawn Saturday, a storm system moved in that wasn't supposed to exist. The National Weather Service had predicted calm conditions, but mountain weather has its own rules. By midnight, winds were gusting over 80 miles per hour. Rain turned to sleet, then to snow. The storm was violent enough to uproot trees and send unprepared campers fleeing to their cars. But when morning came and the storm cleared, Site 23 was empty. Not just vacated, completely empty. The tent was gone, along with every piece of gear, every trace that Michael and Sofia Torres had ever been there. Even the fire ring they'd used showed no signs of recent activity, as if the rain had washed away 5 years of camping trips in a single night. Other campers initially assumed the father and daughter had packed up and left during the storm, but their car was still in the parking area, keys hanging from the ignition. Michael's wallet was in the glove compartment, Sofia's phone charging cable still plugged into the cigarette lighter. Everything suggested they'd planned to return. The search began that Saturday morning and quickly became one of the largest missing persons operations in Mount Rainier's history. Park rangers, search and rescue teams, and volunteers combed every trail, every campsite, every accessible area of the mountain. They found nothing. No footprints, no dropped equipment, no sign that Michael and Sofia had ever left their campsite on foot. Dogs couldn't pick up a scent trail beyond the empty Site 23. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging found no heat signatures. Even experienced trackers who'd spent decades reading the mountain's secrets came up empty. It was as if the Torres family had simply evaporated into the storm. Days stretched into weeks. The search area expanded to cover remote valleys and high alpine zones that would require technical climbing to reach. Rescue teams rappelled into crevasses, explored cave systems, and checked every shelter and emergency cache on the mountain. Michael's brother flew in from California to coordinate with volunteers. Sofia's classmates held vigils. Local news stations ran daily updates. But Mount Rainier kept its secrets. The official search was called off after 3 weeks. Michael and Sofia Torres were declared missing persons, their case filed away with the mountain's other unsolved disappearances. Their story became local legend. The father and daughter who vanished into a storm that shouldn't have existed, leaving behind only questions and an empty campsite that yielded no answers. Life moved on, as it always does. The campground reopened. Other families came to make their own memories on the mountain. But those who'd been there that night never forgot the mystery of Site 23 and how a storm had seemingly swallowed 2 people without leaving so much as a footprint behind. 5 years passed. Marcus Chen had been climbing Mount Rainier for 15 years, but he'd never attempted the technical route up the Liberty Ridge. It was October again. Almost exactly 5 years since the Torres disappearance, though Marcus didn't make that connection until later. He was focused on the challenge ahead, a multi-day climb that would test every skill he'd developed as a mountaineer. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, minimal wind, temperatures just cold enough to keep the snow stable. Marcus and his climbing partner Janet Walsh had spent 2 days working their way up the mountain, camping at 10,000 feet before making their summit push. They were making good time, feeling strong as they approached the technical sections near the peak. It was Janet who saw it first. "Marcus," she called out, her voice carrying a strange note that made him look up from his ice axe placement. "What the hell is that?" Marcus followed her gaze and felt his world tilt sideways. There, approximately 500 feet above them, and somehow attached to the near vertical rock face of Liberty Ridge, was something that shouldn't exist. A bright orange tent, hanging from the cliff like some impossible flag. "That's not possible," Marcus said, but his eyes weren't lying. The tent was there, clearly visible against the dark rock, fluttering slightly in the high-altitude wind. It wasn't torn or damaged. It looked almost new, as if someone had pitched it that morning on a campsite that didn't exist. Janet lowered her binoculars and looked at Marcus with an expression he'd never seen before. "That's at 14,000 feet. There's no ledge there, no place to set up camp. And how would anyone even get a tent up there? We're the only climbing team on this route." Marcus pulled out his own binoculars and studied the impossible sight. The tent was definitely there, hanging from what appeared to be nothing more than vertical rock. There were no ropes visible, no anchors, no climbing gear that might explain how it had been secured. It simply hung there, defying gravity and common sense. "We need to report this," Janet said, but her voice was uncertain. "Who do you call when you find something that can't exist?" They took photographs, lots of them, using telephoto lenses to capture as much detail as possible. The tent appeared to be a standard 3-season camping tent, the kind you might buy at any outdoor gear store. bright orange fabric with gray accents, a small vestibule that flapped gently in the wind. It looked entirely normal except for its impossible location on a cliff face where no tent should be able to hang. Marcus and Janet completed their climb, but the mysterious tent dominated their conversation during the descent. Neither could explain what they'd seen. Both were experienced mountaineers who understood the mountain's dangers and limitations. Tents didn't hang from vertical rock faces 14,000 feet in the air. It was physically impossible. But photographs don't lie. When they reached the parking area 2 days later, Marcus immediately called the Park Service. The ranger who took his call was skeptical until Marcus emailed the photographs. Within an hour, a rescue helicopter was in the air, carrying a technical team to investigate what the climbing community was already calling the hanging tent mystery. What the rescue team found defied explanation. The tent was exactly where Marcus and Janet had photographed it, hanging from the rock face at 14,000 feet with no visible means of support. Attempts to reach it by helicopter were unsuccessful. The downdraft from the rotors in the thin air made it too dangerous to get close enough for a detailed examination. A technical climbing team was assembled to reach the tent from below, but even experienced rescuers struggled with the extreme altitude and difficult conditions. When they finally managed to get close enough for a detailed look, what they found made the mystery even deeper. The tent was intact, showing no signs of damage from 5 years of mountain weather. The fabric was clean, the zippers functional, the guy lines properly tensioned. There were no anchor points, no climbing gear, no ropes or hardware that might explain how it was attached to the rock. It simply hung there, as if the mountain itself was holding it in place. Inside the tent, rescuers found camping gear that had been neatly arranged as if its owners had just stepped out for a moment. 2 sleeping bags, still in their stuff sacks. A small camp stove with an unused fuel canister. A water bottle half full of liquid that had somehow avoided freezing despite 5 years at altitude. And most unsettling of all, a journal with an entry dated 5 years earlier. Dad says the storm is getting worse, but I'm not scared. We're safe here together. The handwriting matched samples from Sofia Torres' school notebooks. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery was what rescuers didn't find. There were no remains, no signs that Michael and Sofia had ever been inside the tent at this impossible location. Their sleeping bags showed no evidence of use. Their gear was arranged as if for a camping trip that had never begun. DNA analysis of the journal confirmed it belonged to Sofia Torres. The tent matched the description of the gear Michael had purchased for their camping trip 5 years earlier. But how it had traveled from a campsite at 2,400 feet to a cliff face at 14,000 feet remained an absolute mystery. The discovery sent shockwaves through the mountaineering community. Experienced climbers studied the photographs and could offer no explanation. Engineers analyzed the forces required to place a tent at that location and declared it impossible without massive construction equipment that couldn't possibly be transported to such a remote technical location. Theories emerged, each more implausible than the last. Some suggested the tent had been carried aloft by the storm winds, but meteorologists pointed out that no wind system could lift a tent that high and then somehow secure it to a rock face. Others proposed that Michael and Sofia had been experienced technical climbers who'd attempted an impossible rescue route. But their background checks revealed no advanced mountaineering experience. The most disturbing theory came from Dr. Sarah Reynolds, a physicist at the University of Washington who'd become fascinated by the case. After studying the rescue photographs and weather data from the night of the disappearance, she published a paper suggesting that the tent's position violated several fundamental laws of physics. Not just improbable, impossible. The tent is hanging in a location where gravitational forces should make it fall, Dr. Reynolds explained to a gathering of scientists and mountaineers. There are no anchor points, no support structures, no physical explanation for how it remains in position. According to everything we understand about physics, that tent should not be able to hang there. The implications of Dr. Reynolds' analysis were unsettling. If the tent truly couldn't exist in that position according to known physics, then what was holding it there? As news of the discovery spread, Mount Rainier became a pilgrimage site for conspiracy theorists, paranormal investigators, and curious tourists. The Park Service was forced to restrict access to the Liberty Ridge route due to the number of unprepared climbers attempting to reach the tent. Social media exploded with theories ranging from alien intervention to government cover-ups. But for the climbing community, the hanging tent represented something more troubling. A reminder that even their most familiar mountains held secrets that defied understanding. Marcus Chen, who'd discovered the tent, stopped climbing Mount Rainier altogether. "I've spent 15 years on that mountain," he told reporters. "I thought I knew every rock, every route, every danger. Finding that tent made me realize I don't know anything at all." The tent remained in position for 3 more months before mysteriously disappearing during another October storm. When climbers returned to Liberty Ridge the following spring, the cliff face was empty. No tent, no evidence that anything had ever hung there. Even the microscopic scratches that rescuers had documented on the rock's surface were gone, as if the mountain had healed itself. The Torres family tent was never found again, despite extensive searches of the areas below where it had hung. Like Michael and Sofia themselves, it had vanished without leaving a trace. Today, 5 years after the tent's discovery and 10 years after the original disappearance, the Torres case remains one of Mount Rainier's most baffling mysteries. The official investigation is closed, filed away with other unexplained incidents that mountain rescue teams prefer not to discuss in detail. But the questions linger. How did a camping tent travel from a low-elevation campsite to a vertical cliff face at 14,000 feet? How did it hang there for 5 years without anchor points or support structures? And most haunting of all, what happened to Michael and Sofia Torres during that storm that defied prediction? Dr. Reynolds continues her research, publishing papers that challenge conventional understanding of gravitational forces and structural engineering. She's become convinced that the hanging tent represents evidence of phenomena that current science can't explain. "We like to think we understand the natural world," she says. "The Torres case suggests we may be wrong about some very fundamental things." The Cougar Rock Campground still operates, and Site 23 is available for reservation, but many campers who know the story choose other locations, especially during October storms. Rangers report that some visitors have claimed to hear voices calling from the upper reaches of the mountain on clear nights, though these reports are dismissed as imagination or altitude-induced hallucinations. Michael Torres's brother still visits Mount Rainier every October, hiking the trails his brother and niece once loved. He carries photos of them, shows them to other hikers, asks if anyone has seen anything unusual. After 10 years, he's never stopped hoping for answers. "I know they're gone," he told a local news reporter on the 10th anniversary of their disappearance. "But I need to understand what happened to them. How do 2 people just vanish into thin air? How does their tent end up hanging from a cliff 11,000 feet above where they were last seen? It doesn't make sense, and until it does, I can't let go." Sofia Torres would be 24 now, probably graduated from college, maybe starting a career or a family of her own. Michael would be 52, perhaps taking his grandchildren on their first camping trips. Instead, They remain frozen in time at ages 42 and 14, preserved in the memories of those who knew them and in the questions that refuse to be answered. The hanging tent mystery reminds us that despite all our technology, all our scientific understanding, there are still places where the impossible becomes reality. Mount Rainier keeps its secrets well, and perhaps some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only experienced, wondered about, and remembered. But on clear October nights, when the wind carries whispers down from the high peaks and shadows dance in unexpected ways, it's hard not to wonder if Michael and Sofia Torres are still out there somewhere, still camping in places where physics doesn't apply and tents can hang in the sky like impossible dreams. What Michael's brother didn't know was that the mystery was far from over. 3 months after the tent disappeared from Liberty Ridge, something else happened that would deepen the puzzle even further. Dr. Emily Carter, a glaciologist studying ice formations on Mount Rainier, was conducting routine measurements at the Nisqually Glacier when her equipment detected an anomaly. Her ground-penetrating radar, designed to measure ice thickness and density, picked up what appeared to be a void deep within the glacier, a hollow space that shouldn't exist in solid ice that had been forming for centuries. At first, I thought it was equipment malfunction, Dr. Carter later explained to investigators. The readings showed a cavity approximately 8 feet by 6 feet, perfectly preserved about 30 feet down in ice that's been solid for over 100 years. It was impossible, but Dr. Carter was thorough. She ran the tests again, calibrated her equipment, brought in additional specialists with different radar systems. Every test confirmed the same result. There was a chamber deep in the glacier, and it contained something metallic that was reflecting the radar signals in unusual ways. The decision to excavate was not made lightly. Drilling into the Nisqually Glacier required extensive permits and environmental impact studies. The National Park Service was reluctant to authorize such an intrusive investigation based on what might be instrument error. But Dr. Carter persisted, and eventually, a carefully controlled excavation was approved. The drilling took 3 days. As they descended through layers of ice that told the story of decades of snowfall and compression, Dr. Carter's team worked with the precision of archaeologists uncovering ancient artifacts. At 28 feet, their drill bit hit something solid. What they extracted from the glacier defied every understanding of how ice forms and moves. Perfectly preserved in the ancient ice was Michael Torres's camping stove, the same stove that had been inventoried and photographed in the hanging tent 5 years earlier. But this wasn't just any camping stove. This was the exact same model, with the same serial number, in the same condition as the one rescuers had documented at 14,000 feet. The ice around the stove was older than Michael Torres himself, Dr. Carter explained to a stunned research team. Carbon dating and isotope analysis confirmed that this section of the glacier formed in the 1960s, decades before the Torres family was even born. So how did equipment from 2019 end up in ice from 1965? The implications were staggering. Not only had the tent appeared in an impossible location, but pieces of the Torres camping gear were somehow embedded in ice that predated their existence by decades. It suggested that whatever had happened to Michael and Sofia involved forces that operated outside normal temporal boundaries. Dr. Reynolds, the physicist who had studied the hanging tent, was called in to analyze the Glacier Discovery. Her preliminary findings were even more unsettling than her work on the tent's impossible position. "We're not just dealing with objects appearing in places they shouldn't be," she told the assembled team of scientists. "We're dealing with objects appearing in times they shouldn't exist." The news of the Glacier Discovery was kept classified for 6 months while researchers attempted to understand its implications. During that time, other anomalies began surfacing around Mount Rainier. Park rangers reported compass readings that didn't match magnetic north in specific areas near where the Torres family had camped. Hikers complained of GPS devices malfunctioning in locations that had never shown navigational problems before. Most disturbing were the reports from other campers at Cougar Rock. Several families camping in sites near the former Site 23 reported strange dreams. Vivid nightmares of being caught in storms that seemed to come from inside the mountain itself. Children woke screaming about the tent in the sky and the man and girl who couldn't come down. Dr. Amanda Foster, a sleep researcher from Johns Hopkins who heard about these reports, convinced the Park Service to let her conduct a study. She set up monitoring equipment at Site 23 and recruited volunteer families to camp there while being observed for sleep disturbances. The results were unprecedented. Every single family that camped at Site 23 during Dr. Foster's study experienced what she termed synchronized anomalous dreams. Parents and children who had never met the Torres family or heard their story reported identical dream sequences, finding themselves in a tent that was floating above the ground, watching a father and daughter who seemed to be calling for help, but whose voices couldn't be heard. The statistical probability of multiple unrelated individuals having identical dreams about specific people and events they've never been exposed to is essentially 0, Dr. Foster reported. Either we're dealing with some form of environmental factor that's influencing brain activity in very specific ways, or we're observing something that current neuroscience can't explain. The dreams always followed the same pattern. Campers would find themselves standing outside their tents in the middle of a storm that felt different from normal weather, heavier, more oppressive, charged with an energy that seemed to come from the mountain itself. In the distance, they could see an orange tent floating just above the tree line, swaying gently despite the violent winds around it. Inside the floating tent, silhouetted against the orange fabric, were 2 figures, a man and a teenage girl. The figures would wave at the dreamers, sometimes calling out words that couldn't be understood over the storm noise. The dreamers reported feeling an overwhelming urge to help, but finding themselves unable to move, as if the storm was holding them in place. The dreams always ended the same way. The floating tent would rise higher and higher until it disappeared into the clouds, leaving the dreamers standing in sudden calm, with clear skies overhead and no sign that a storm had ever existed. Dr. Foster's equipment recorded unusual electromagnetic activity during these dream episodes. Brain scans of sleeping campers showed patterns of neural activity that didn't match any known sleep states. Most mysteriously, her instruments detected brief spikes in gravitational field variations during the times when campers reported dreaming about the floating tent. Gravitational anomalies don't just happen, Dr. Foster explained to a conference of neuroscientists and physicists. Gravity is one of the most stable forces in the universe. The fact that we're measuring variations in gravitational fields that correlate with people's dreams suggests we're dealing with phenomena that operate outside our current understanding of both consciousness and physics. The story might have remained in academic journals and classified government reports if not for Maria Santos, a documentary filmmaker who had been following unexplained disappearances in national parks. Santos had heard rumors about the Torres case and the subsequent discoveries, and she was determined to bring the story to public attention. Santos spent months convincing researchers to go on record, obtaining declassified documents through Freedom of Information Act requests, and interviewing witnesses who had remained silent for years. Her documentary, The Hanging Tent, a Mount Rainier Mystery, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and shocked audiences with its implications. The film revealed details that had been kept from the public: the Glacier Discovery, the dream studies, the electromagnetic anomalies, and the growing body of evidence that the Torres disappearance involved forces that challenged fundamental scientific principles. More importantly, it raised questions about how many other unexplained disappearances might involve similar phenomena. Dr. Janet Murray, a theoretical physicist at MIT who was interviewed for the documentary, proposed a hypothesis that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. What if certain locations on Earth experience what we might call temporal displacement zones, areas where the normal flow of time becomes unstable? The Torres case might represent evidence that such zones exist, and that people or objects entering them can become displaced not just in space, but in time itself. Murray's theory suggested that Michael and Sofia hadn't simply disappeared. They had become caught in a temporal anomaly that scattered their physical presence across different time periods. The tent hanging at 14,000 feet might represent their location in one temporal displacement, while the camping stove in the glacier represented their presence in another time period entirely. The dreams experienced by other campers might be glimpses into these displaced time streams, Murray explained. If temporal boundaries become permeable in these zones, it's possible that sensitive individuals could perceive events occurring in parallel time flows. The documentary's release triggered an avalanche of new reports from around the world. Similar cases emerged from other mountain ranges, the Himalayas, the Andes, the Alps, where climbers and hikers had discovered objects in impossible locations or experienced dreams that seemed to connect them to missing persons from decades earlier. The scientific establishment initially dismissed these reports as attention-seeking behavior inspired by the documentary, but as more evidence accumulated, a small but growing number of researchers began to take the temporal displacement theory seriously. The Torres case had opened a door to questions that science wasn't prepared to answer. Dr. Reynolds assembled an international team of physicists, geologists, and consciousness researchers to study what they termed spatial temporal anomaly zones. Using sophisticated monitoring equipment, they identified several locations around Mount Rainier where traditional physics seemed to operate differently. Their findings were extraordinary. In these zones, instruments detected fluctuations in gravitational fields, variations in the passage of time as measured by atomic clocks, and electromagnetic signatures that didn't match any known natural phenomena. Most remarkably, they discovered that these anomalies occurred in cycles that corresponded to specific weather patterns, particularly the type of sudden violent storms that had occurred the night Michael and Sofia Torres vanished. We're beginning to understand that extreme weather events might trigger temporal disturbances in locations where geological conditions create natural instabilities in space-time, Dr. Reynolds reported to a gathering of international researchers. Mount Rainier, with its unique combination of volcanic activity, glacial mass, and elevation, appears to be particularly susceptible to these phenomena. The research team's work revealed something even more unsettling. The temporal displacement zones were becoming more active. Over the past decade, the frequency and intensity of anomalous readings had increased significantly. Climate change, with its more extreme weather patterns, seemed to be triggering more frequent temporal disturbances. This discovery led to a disturbing realization. If temporal displacement zones were becoming more active, more people might experience what happened to the Torres family. The implications for search and rescue operations were staggering. How do you rescue someone who has been displaced in time? The Mount Rainier National Park Service, working with the research team, quietly implemented new protocols for dealing with unexplained disappearances. Search teams now carry specialized equipment designed to detect temporal anomalies. Rangers receive training in recognizing the early signs of spatial temporal disturbances. Most importantly, certain areas of the park are now subject to immediate evacuation if specific weather and electromagnetic conditions align. But perhaps the most significant development came from an unexpected source. Sarah Martinez, a psychic investigator who had been following the Torres case, claimed to have made contact with Sofia Torres through what she termed temporal mediumship. Martinez's claims were initially dismissed by researchers, but her specific knowledge of details that had never been made public forced even skeptical scientists to take notice. According to Martinez, Sofia and Michael Torres were not dead, but displaced, existing in a parallel time stream where they remained 14 and 42 years old, trapped in an eternal camping trip that they couldn't escape. "They know they're missing," Martinez claimed during a filmed session with Dr. Reynolds. "They can see our world sometimes, like looking through a window, but they can't cross back over. The storm created a barrier between time streams that they can't penetrate." Martinez's sessions, while unverified by traditional scientific methods, provided information that proved accurate when checked against evidence that had never been publicly released. She described the contents of Sofia's journal with perfect accuracy, mentioned Michael's specific concerns about the weather on their last night, and provided details about their camping gear that only the original investigators knew. Most compelling was Martinez's description of what she claimed Sofia was experiencing in the displaced time stream. She says they're still at their campsite, but it's different. The mountain looks the same, but the sky is wrong, and time doesn't move forward. She can see other campers sometimes, like ghosts, but they can't see her. She's been trying to get messages through to our world, hoping someone will find a way to bring them back. Whether or not one believed in psychic phenomena, Martinez's sessions raised profound questions about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to temporal displacement. If the Torres family was indeed trapped in a parallel time stream, could consciousness exist independently of normal temporal flow? And if so, what did that mean for our understanding of life, death, and the fundamental nature of reality? The story continues to evolve. New research teams arrive at Mount Rainier regularly, drawn by the growing body of evidence that something extraordinary occurred there. The hanging tent may be gone, but the questions it raised about the nature of time, space, and human consciousness persist. Dr. Reynolds recently announced plans for the most ambitious study yet, a permanent research station at Mount Rainier dedicated to monitoring temporal anomalies and developing protocols for potential rescue operations in displaced time streams. If the Torres family is still out there, still alive in some parallel version of time, then we have a moral obligation to find a way to bring them home, she stated at a recent conference. The implications extend far beyond one missing family. As climate change continues to trigger more extreme weather events, and as our understanding of temporal displacement zones grows, we may discover that the Torres case was not an isolated incident, but the first documented example of a phenomenon that affects more people than we ever imagined. For now, the mystery endures. Mount Rainier keeps its secrets. but science is slowly learning to ask the right questions. And somewhere, in a time stream we can't quite reach, a father and daughter may still be camping under stars that shine in patterns we've never seen, waiting for someone to find the key that will finally bring them home.